3 weeks ago, I found out my sister had been hiding something so carefully, so completely, that for a few minutes I could not even process what I was looking at. At first, it seemed like a small mistake, a document in the wrong place, a name that didn't match the story I had heard for years. But within 1 hour, I realized my sister had built an entire lie and expected no one to ever uncover it. What made it worse was not only the secret itself. It was how normal she had seemed while carrying it. She still came to family dinners. She still smiled for holiday photos. She still let our parents defend her as if she had done nothing wrong. That is how some truths finally end up on channels like Exposed Stories Media. Not because they are invented to shock people, because real family secrets often survive by looking ordinary right up until the moment they collapse. And when they do, everyone realizes they were standing much closer to danger than they thought. My sister's name is Natalie. She is 4 years older than me, and for most of my life she was the person in our family everyone described as driven. Not warm in an obvious way, but competent. Not sentimental, but effective. If something needed to be organized, fixed, or managed, Natalie usually took control of it. Our parents loved that about her. My father admired discipline. My mother admired polish. Natalie had both. She was the daughter who always looked prepared. Even as a teenager, she acted like someone building a future on purpose. She got good grades, knew how to talk to adults, and had a way of making even impulsive choices sound strategic. People trusted her because she sounded certain. I was different. I was quieter, slower to decide things, less interested in impressing anyone. Where Natalie moved quickly and confidently, I hesitated and watched. That difference shaped our relationship for years. I grew up assuming that if Natalie said something with confidence, it was probably true. That assumption lasted far too long. She left for college in the year 2012 and rarely came home for more than a few days at a time after that. She built a career in event branding, moved to a larger city, and started posting the kind of life updates that made relatives proud. Professional milestones, travel photos, stylish apartments, smiling group dinners with people who all looked successful. Our parents told everyone Natalie was doing wonderfully, and in many ways it looked like she was. About 5 years later, she started bringing a man named Aaron to family gatherings. He was quiet, well-dressed, and never seemed fully comfortable in our house. Not rude, just cautious. At the time, I assumed he was simply reserved. Natalie introduced him as her long-term partner. That mattered to our parents more than they admitted. They had spent years worrying that she cared more about image than about building a real life with someone. So when Aaron appeared, they relaxed. Within another year, Natalie said they were basically married without the paperwork. That was how she put it. She did not like being questioned about timelines, future plans, or whether children were part of the picture. She always answered with the same polished detachment. She said modern relationships did not need traditional milestones to be real. Our mother accepted that outwardly. Privately, she told me once that she suspected Natalie wanted control more than intimacy. At the time, I thought that sounded unfair. Later, I realized it was one of the few times my mother saw her clearly. The first sign that something was wrong came through our Aunt Melissa. Aunt Melissa was not dramatic by nature. She was careful, practical, and not the kind of person who spread rumors casually. That is why I paid attention when she called me one evening and asked whether Natalie was okay financially. I told her I thought so. She said Natalie had asked to borrow $8,000 2 months earlier for what she described as a temporary legal issue involving Aaron's business. She promised repayment within 6 weeks. The 6 weeks had become 2 months, and now Natalie was avoiding specifics. That alone might not have meant much. Families lend money. Deadlines slip. People get embarrassed. But I knew Natalie well enough to understand one thing immediately. If she had needed help, She would never have let our parents know unless she had no other option. Her image mattered too much. I asked whether our parents knew. Aunt Melissa said no. She said Natalie had specifically asked her not to mention it because Mom and Dad would overreact. That phrase bothered me. It sounded less like privacy and more like management. A week later, our cousin Jenna mentioned something similar at a birthday dinner. Not a large amount, just $1,500 Natalie had asked for temporarily after a travel reimbursement problem. Jenna laughed while mentioning it, but the laugh sounded thin. I asked if Natalie had paid her back. She said not yet. At that point, I still didn't think the secret was huge. I thought my sister was hiding debt, maybe living above her means, maybe juggling cash flow problems she was too proud to admit. That would have fit the version of Natalie I knew. Then my mother said something that shifted the whole shape of it. She said Natalie had recently offered to help them reorganize some family paperwork, insurance files, property tax records, old identification documents. The kind of administrative project our parents always postpone until someone younger and more organized offers help. That made me uncomfortable immediately. Not because helping parents is suspicious by itself. Because people hiding financial strain should not be handling access to family records without scrutiny. The combination of those two facts felt wrong. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house after work and found Natalie alone at the dining room table with 3 open folders in front of her. She smiled the moment she saw me. Too fast. I asked what she was doing, and she said she was helping Dad update beneficiary information and sort out old account documents before something important got missed. The answer sounded efficient, reasonable, and slightly rehearsed. I asked where our parents were. She said they went to the pharmacy. Then she casually closed one folder and changed the subject. That should have been the end of it. Instead, one paper slid partly free as she moved the stack. I only caught a glimpse, but the name at the top was not our father's. It was hers, and below it, on the same page, was our parents' home address and what looked like a line of financial account information. When she saw me looking, she covered the paper with her hand. Then she laughed lightly and said it was just a mailing correction issue because some of her old records still pointed to the house. Again, plausible. Again, too smooth. The next morning, I called my father and asked whether Natalie was helping with anything involving bank forms or identity documents. He said no. That answer sat in my chest like ice. Because if Natalie was telling the truth, my father should have known exactly what she was doing. Instead, he sounded confused. He thought she was only helping my mother sort medical bills and insurance renewals. That was when suspicion stopped being vague. I drove back to their house that evening. Not dramatically, not with any clear accusation ready. Just with the growing understanding that my sister was touching documents she had no reason to be handling and borrowing money she was too evasive to explain. My parents were home this time. Natalie was not. I asked my father if I could look through the folders on the dining room table. He shrugged and said yes. Most of it was ordinary paperwork, policy statements, utility records, copies of tax forms. Then I found the page I had seen under Natalie's hand. It was not a mailing correction. It was a draft application for a line of credit. The applicant's name was Natalie. The listed collateral references included financial information connected to our parents' property, and one section had been partly completed in my father's name. For a few seconds, I could not make sense of what I was looking at. Then my mother came beside me, read the page, and said the one thing that turned my suspicion into fear. She said, "We never signed anything like this." The room changed instantly. My father took the paper from my hand and read it 3 times. His face did not become angry first. It became stunned. He asked where I found it. I told him Natalie had been sorting papers there the day before. Then my mother opened another folder and found a photocopy of her driver's license she did not remember making. That was the true beginning of everything. Not the money she borrowed, not the excuses. The realization that my sister was gathering the documents needed to do something much bigger than admit she was short on cash. That night, when I called Natalie and asked what she was doing with our parents' information, she did not sound ashamed. She sounded irritated. She said we were jumping to conclusions. She said the paperwork was preliminary and no one had actually done anything. Then she made the mistake that destroyed her. She said, "You were never supposed to see that." That sentence told me more than any confession could have. Whatever Natalie was hiding, it was not accidental. It was planned, and she thought no one would ever find out. After Natalie said, "You were never supposed to see that," I knew two things at once. First, she had no innocent explanation. Second, the truth was probably larger than one unfinished application. People do not speak that way when they are misunderstood. They speak that way when exposure happened too early. My father called her back immediately after I hung up. She did not answer. He left a voicemail telling her to come to the house that night and explain herself. When she still did not respond 2 hours later, my mother started pacing in the kitchen, repeating that there had to be some context we were missing. That phrase is how families protect themselves from shock. There had to be context. Maybe there was. But context does not erase intent. I stayed and helped my father go through more of the paperwork. This time we checked every folder, every loose envelope, every drawer near the dining room desk. What we found made the situation worse very quickly. There were copies of my parents' tax returns from the previous 2 years. A property valuation printout from a lender website. Photographs Natalie had taken of account summaries on her phone and then printed, apparently to track something more carefully later. My father kept asking the same question. How did she even know what to look for? The answer was obvious and painful. She knew because she had been studying them, not in some emotional family sense. In the practical sense of a person gathering the ingredients for financial leverage. Each new page felt less like evidence of desperation and more like evidence of preparation. Around 11 that night, Natalie finally called my mother. She was calm. That almost made it worse. She said she didn't want to come over while everyone was worked up. She said she would explain in the morning when people were thinking clearly. My father took the phone from my mother and told her if she was not at the house by 8, he would contact the bank and a lawyer before talking to her again. That finally pierced her calm. She said that would be unnecessary and make things worse. My father said, "You made things worse already," and hung up. No one slept much that night. The next morning, Natalie arrived 10 minutes early. She came in carrying coffee for our mother and pastries no one touched. That detail has stayed with me because it revealed how she still thought presentation could manage reality. She believed if she entered the room with the right tone, she could keep the truth within negotiable boundaries. She sat down, folded her hands, and said there had been a misunderstanding. My father put the credit application in front of her. Then he placed the license copy beside it. Then the tax return copy. By the time he was done, the table looked less like a family breakfast and more like an evidence review. Natalie's face changed. Not panic, not guilt, calculation. She asked how much of it we had seen. That question told us everything. People who are innocent ask what you think you found. People who are caught ask how much is already known. My father asked the question directly. Had she attempted to use their property and financial documents to open credit in her name? Natalie did not answer immediately. Then she said the application had not been submitted yet. That was not a denial. It was a narrowing. My mother started crying quietly. She asked why. Why their documents? Why secrecy? Why money from relatives? Why any of it? Natalie exhaled slowly, like a person forced to explain a complex inconvenience to less capable people. That tone nearly made me leave the room. She said Aaron had been going through something involving debts tied to a former business dispute. Their options were limited. Traditional lenders would not work with them quickly enough. She said she planned to secure temporary credit using family assets as backing, resolve Aaron's issue, and restore everything before anyone noticed. My father looked at her like he did not recognize her. Then he asked whether she had lost her mind. Natalie flinched for the first time. Not because of the insult, because the emotion behind it made clear that her usual tools were failing. No polished explanation was going to turn this into a misunderstood act of efficiency. I asked the next question. How much money did Aaron owe, and to whom? She said it was complicated. I said no, it wasn't. There was an amount and there were names. Anything else was theater. That was when the real twist entered the room. Natalie admitted the debt was not recent. It had been building for over a year. Aaron had hidden large financial problems from her at first, and paid private obligations, old tax issues, money borrowed from former business contacts under the promise of repayment after a failed expansion project. By the time she understood the size of it, they were already under pressure. But that was only the beginning. One of the men Aaron owed had started contacting Natalie directly, not threatening violence. Something more controlled than that. He implied that if the money was not repaid, he would expose other parts of Aaron's past that could cost him his current work and possibly involve legal consequences. I asked what other parts meant. Natalie looked down. Then she admitted Aaron had lied to her about more than debt. He had used slightly different versions of his name in past business filings, buried civil claims, and concealed the fact that one earlier venture ended with allegations of misappropriated client funds. For a moment, the room went silent in a completely different way, because suddenly the secret was no longer only Natalie's scheme to obtain credit. It was a marriage built around concealed financial instability and a husband whose history might have been fundamentally false. The terrifying part was how quickly Natalie adapted to protecting him once she found out. My mother asked whether Aaron knew she was trying to use our parents' documents. Natalie nodded. That answer landed harder than almost anything else she said. It meant he was not simply the source of a problem she was scrambling to fix. He was participating in the solution. A solution that involved my sister taking copies of our parents' records, borrowing money quietly from relatives, and attempting to open credit under conditions no one had consented to. My father stood up and told her to leave. Not forever. Not yet. But leave the house and do not touch another piece of family paperwork until we understood exactly how much damage had already been done. Natalie did not move. She said if we did not help, Aaron's life would collapse and hers would collapse with it. She said they only needed one bridge, one temporary fix, one line of credit large enough to quiet the pressure and buy time. That phrase again, buy time. Secrets survive on purchased time. Not truth, not resolution, just time. I asked if she had already submitted anything under our parents' information. She hesitated too long. Then she admitted one draft had been partially processed through an online system and then paused before final verification. That meant their information was already in motion somewhere beyond the house. That was enough for my father to call the bank immediately, with Natalie still sitting there. The next 2 hours were some of the ugliest our family had ever lived through. Fraud alerts were placed. Documentation was frozen where possible. A banker advised immediate review of recent inquiries and account access logs. My father, who had spent his whole life believing discipline could protect a family from chaos, had to say aloud that his own daughter might have attempted financial fraud using his records. Natalie cried then. Real tears this time. Not because she was morally transformed in the moment, because the structure of concealment was collapsing faster than she could manage it. Later that afternoon, another truth came out. Aunt Melissa had not been the only relative who lent her money. Neither had Jenna. By the time we started calling people quietly, the amounts became staggering. 8,000 from one aunt, 1,500 from a cousin, 4,000 from an old college friend, 10,000 from a former coworker. She told a story about temporary legal fees. 3,000 from our mother's church friend who believed she was helping Natalie with a private emergency. The total climbed past 40,000 before dinner, and that was only the money we could verify in a single day. Natalie had not simply panicked once and reached for family paperwork. She had been building a secret rescue structure around Aaron's hidden life for months, maybe longer. The attempted credit application was only the point where desperation moved from unethical borrowing into something potentially criminal. That evening, after she left, I sat alone in my car for almost 20 minutes before driving home. I kept replaying one detail. She did not seem shocked by what Aaron had done. She seemed committed to outrunning it. That was the part that destroyed something in me. If Aaron had deceived her once and she immediately told the truth, the story would be different. But Natalie became part of the concealment. Not accidentally, not passively, systematically. The next morning, she texted me privately. "Not our parents. Me," she wrote. "You have no idea what would happen if this gets fully exposed." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied with the only honest sentence I had left. "Neither did you." What happened after the truth came out was slower, uglier, and more exhausting than the discovery itself. That is the part people often miss about family secrets. The revelation feels like the climax. In reality, it is only the beginning of the administrative, emotional, and moral cleanup. For the first week, our family moved in crisis mode. My father met with the bank twice. A fraud report was documented, though he stopped short of pressing formal criminal claims immediately because the partial application had been interrupted before final execution. My mother called relatives one by one, apologizing in a voice I had never heard from her before. There is humiliation in telling people your own daughter used their trust as a financial bridge. That humiliation aged both of my parents in real time. Natalie stayed with Aaron during those first days. That mattered to me, because even after exposure, even after tears, even after seeing our parents' faces when the truth was laid out, she still chose proximity to him over distance from the thing that had nearly destroyed us. That choice clarified more than any explanation. A week later, Aaron asked to meet my father. Not to confess cleanly, to discuss a path forward. That language alone made my father decline the first request. Eventually, though, they met with me present. Aaron looked almost exactly as he always had. Calm, well-dressed, controlled. If I had seen him in a grocery store without context, I would have assumed he was just another professional husband dealing with ordinary stress. That is what made him so dangerous. He admitted the debts. Not all the details. Not every lie. Only what he understood could no longer be denied. He said an old business venture collapsed, private lenders pressed hard, and certain past filings under alternate name versions were administrative remnants of restructuring efforts. That phrase told me he was still translating moral choices into technical vocabulary to reduce the damage in the room. My father asked one question that cut through all of it. "Did you know she was trying to use our records?" Aaron said yes. Then he added that he never wanted it to come to that. That sentence almost made me laugh. As if reluctance mattered after consent, my father told him to leave before he said anything else. He did. That meeting ended any illusion I had that Natalie was trying to rescue a basically decent man from a temporary crisis. Aaron was not overwhelmed by circumstances. He was practiced in concealment, and my sister had bound herself to that practice so tightly that she mistook complicity for loyalty. Over the following month, more information surfaced. One lender had already issued a preliminary inquiry using our parents' data, which had to be disputed formally. Two of the relatives Natalie borrowed from admitted she presented the requests as urgent, confidential, and tied to legal exposure for someone else, without naming Aaron. A former friend of hers revealed that Natalie had quietly sold jewelry, designer items, and even some inherited pieces from our grandmother without telling anyone. Every new detail extended the timeline backward. The secret was not born in one bad week. It had a whole hidden life before we ever touched it. My mother wanted reconciliation almost immediately, not because she was naive, because she was a mother, and mothers sometimes confuse the desire to stop bleeding with the desire to heal. She kept saying Natalie must be terrified and trapped. That was true, but fear does not erase agency. I said that to my mother once, gently, and she cried harder than before. Not because I was cruel, because she knew I was right and hated that both truths existed together. My father became colder over time, not warmer. He stopped calling Natalie, stopped asking for updates. When she texted, he answered only with practical instructions related to bank protections and what she still needed to repay family members. In his mind, love had not ended, but trust had been stripped to bone. The person who changed most visibly was me. At first, I thought my main emotion was anger. Then I realized it was something quieter and worse. Disorientation. Natalie had always been the sister who moved ahead of consequences and then explained them in language that made others feel slow for objecting. I used to think that made her capable. Now I saw it more clearly. She had always believed confidence could substitute for consent, that if she sounded certain enough, other people's discomfort would become background noise. That recognition reached backward into childhood and changed old memories. How she borrowed things without asking and returned them as if permission had always existed. How she volunteered our mother for favors before checking. How she made decisions first and presented them later as obvious. For years, the family called that leadership. It was never leadership. It was early rehearsal. About 6 weeks after the truth came out, Natalie asked to see me alone. I almost refused. Then I agreed because some part of me still needed to understand whether she saw what she had done in the same shape I did. We met at a quiet cafe near the river, the kind of place where people talk softly because the room itself feels like it's listening. She looked thinner, tired, but still composed in the way she always had been. That composure made me angry immediately, not because she was calm, because I could not tell whether the calm was real or strategic. She said she knew I hated her. I told her that wasn't accurate. Hatred would have been simpler. What I felt was grief mixed with contempt and the stubborn memory of a sister I no longer trusted to tell the truth even about her own regret. That answer seemed to land. For the first time, she stopped sounding like someone managing optics and started sounding like someone tired. She admitted she knew Aaron was hiding serious financial problems long before she told anyone. She admitted she kept thinking she could get them both out before exposure reached our family. She admitted she justified every new step by comparing it to the disaster she believed would happen if she stopped. Then I asked the most important question. If the credit line had gone through and the relatives had kept waiting quietly, would you ever have told us? She looked at the table for so long I already knew the answer. Eventually, she said, not until I had fixed it. That was it. That was the sentence that killed whatever remained of the old relationship, because it meant the problem was never merely that she was desperate. It meant she believed our trust was something she could ethically use as material until she felt the story was safe to reveal. We were not loved people in that framework. We were delayed consequences. I left the cafe without hugging her. I do not mention that for melodrama. I mention it because I had hugged my sister goodbye after nearly every hard conversation of our lives. That was the first time I understood the relationship we had been trying to save no longer existed in the form I remembered. The financial aftermath took nearly a year to settle. Some relatives were repaid partially. Some accepted repayment plans. One friend threatened legal action before Aaron's family stepped in with limited help to avoid wider exposure. Natalie and Aaron sold their apartment, moved into a cheaper rental, and spent months trying to contain the wreckage. Their marriage survived, at least legally. That fact still unsettles me. Not because I think every bad marriage must end, because staying can reveal things too. And in this case, it revealed that Natalie still preferred being chosen by the wrong person over being honest with the right ones. Exposed Stories media often shares stories where the real damage is not only the secret itself, but what the secret reveals about how a person thinks. This was one of those stories. Natalie's hidden borrowing, the family documents, the lies to relatives, the attempted credit line, all of it was terrible. But the deeper wound was what it showed about her internal logic. She believed if the outcome could still be repaired, the path taken to get there did not fully count. That is how people destroy trust without feeling like villains. They confuse intention with innocence. My mother eventually reopened contact in a limited way. Short calls. No money. No access to paperwork. My father still sees her only on rare occasions and never without a kind of guarded formality that did not exist before. He once told me, when someone uses your trust as a tool, love has to change shape or it dies. That was the most honest thing he said in the whole year. As for me, I no longer tell people Natalie is the person to call when life gets complicated. That title belonged to an older version of her that may never have existed the way I imagined. Now, when I think about her, I think about how dangerous competence can be when it loses its moral center. A chaotic liar is easy to recognize. A polished one can live in your family for decades. If there is one lesson in this story, it is not simply that my sister thought no one would ever find out. It is that secrecy always depends on borrowed confidence, on the assumption that other people will stay slow, polite, trusting, and slightly behind the truth. The moment one person stops cooperating with that structure, the lie begins to collapse. Natalie thought she could outrun exposure. She thought she could smooth over evidence, repay people quietly, fix Aaron's problems, and restore the family narrative before anyone noticed the missing pieces. But lies do not usually fail because the liar becomes honest. They fail because reality accumulates faster than management can contain it. Today, I still love my sister in the way people love those who helped shape their early life. But love and trust are not the same thing. I no longer give her the benefit of my confusion. I no longer let polished explanations substitute for facts. And I no longer mistake desperation for innocence when the desperation has already recruited everyone else's safety into its solution. That clarity cost me the relationship I thought I had with her. Maybe that relationship was already gone long before the secret surfaced. Maybe what finally broke was only the illusion that loyalty could survive anything if people said the right apologetic words afterward. Not all relationships are destroyed by one terrible act. Some are destroyed by the repeated choices that act required. If this story stayed with you, it may be because it reveals something bigger than one sister, one husband, or one family's collapse. That is why Exposed Stories media matters. Not just because shocking secrets make compelling stories, because they reveal the hidden logic people use when they decide the truth can wait, and because sometimes the most painful part is not the secret itself, but realizing the person hiding it believed your trust would always be available for use. If there is someone in your life who keeps asking for patience while resisting clarity, pay attention. Check the papers. Notice the wording. Listen for the sentence that reveals too much. Because sometimes the real danger is not that someone is hiding something. It is that they are absolutely certain you will never find out.